Within a infamous China labor camping, a dissenter imported an SOS email in the Halloween decorations he was constrained to production. Year after, a female in the U.S. outdoor a box of counterfeit tombstones and found his mention. It seemed unfeasible at how they would always encounter. A few years back, as the evenings began receive colder and more dark, Julie Keith memorable the cemetery kit in her attic. She'd selected it up $4 of the Superstore circuit, Kmart, a pair of year up how. It concluded polystyrene headstones, counterfeit skulls and bones, dark spiders and a fabric filled in simulate bloodstream. It had been collection powder in the attic always with. But while her child said she requested a Halloween-themed 5 date of birth side, Julie, later 42, mind of the kit and went upper floor to lead it. Later, as she outdoor the box in her residing chamber, a leaf of on the lining document bring down of. On it was a communication, carefully brush written in dark blue toner. Julie's child selected it up and requested her to recite it. The British was break and often misspelt, but its importance was precise quite. Monsieur, it began. If you occasionally buy the food, happy benevolently email the email to the Planet Humane Order Organization. Thousands human beings there who are by the persecution of the China communistic side by the government will appreciate and recall you ever. Julie recite on. The mention told how the cemetery kit had been manufactured in Block 8, Division 2 of Mazanjia labor camping in Shenyang, China. Inmates down there had to job down there for 15 several hours a day 7 days a 1 week, differently, they will afflict torturement, hit and rough comment. Almost no fee, 10 renminbi/1 monthly. Present 10 renminbi is approximately counterpart to pound or US dollar. Prisoners were arrested on ordinary for 1 to 3 years out of a official trial verdict, the mention extended. Several of them belong to the religious motion Falun Gong. They frequently afflict more than penalty rather than other, the mention told. Down there was no sign at the late. I was type of in upheaval, Julie says. I fair couldn't trust how thing love how was there, in front line of me. It seemed wonderworking how the piece of document had passing thousands of miles to her household in Damascus, close Portland, in the U.S. country of Oregon, and later languished in her household for 2 years before 2012. She tested to think how frantic its writer must include thick felt, how lot bravery it must include undertaken to slide it in amongst the decorations. Julie, a officer at the Goodwill Frugality Keep circuit, knew anything at all on the man, but it was evident to her how he or she desperate requested the planet to aware which was event at Mazanjia. Julie didn't aware wherever to start, so she logged on to Facebook and requested for consultation. She took a picture of the mention and located it for her friends to view. They offered how she pinned humane rights organizations, so Julie rang up and left word messages in several, but she never acquired an answer. Yet, Julie didn't offer up. She took the email in job and showed it to her business's PR officer, who contacted a reporter on the Oregonian, a regional paper. The document shipped an internee to interviewing Julie, but for a pair of months, one day once again, down there was silent. Later abruptly, fair up Yuletide 2012, the history eventually ran. It was on the Oregonian's frontline web page, and once Julie's telephone begun tinkling, TV networks and newspapers of about the planet were request her to say, she found herself at the center of a main world history. Julie was impressed at first. She'd helping to distribution the speech on facility in Mazanjia, fair as the mentions writer had requested. But later she recite the comments under the on the internet news story accountable. Lot firmly criticized her. By producing the mention incomplete, in its link to the accurate block and division of the labor camping in that the writer was detained, she'd done a severe mistake, these commenters told. Certainly now the debunker would be identified by the authorities and singled out for additional penalty. It crushed me, Julie says. I thick felt love, at how spot, I perhaps had made the incorrect item. I thick felt horrible but I fair stored relating behind to the email, the is which the author requested. He requested me to publicize the personality doubt stored whining at Julie, yet. But later, in Medium, 2013, she was contacted by the New York Times. The writer of the mention slipped in amongst the Halloween tombstones and skulls had been tracked downward. And he had a communication for her. 5-year-old Sun Yi looked out of a box in the dark as he ate his skinny lunch at Masanjia jail camping, and saw a team of human beings driving via the darkness external. He couldn't see so, but they emerging to be transport humane skulls and hip bones. Sun Yi was frightened. Same D just newly been condemned but already Same D heard rumors how several of his comrade inmates were exhausted to die. The emerging to be confirmed. Else prisoner said him the team Same D seen were named as the 8 crew, and they treated on which was named the Phantom work. Not length subsequently, in June 2008, a guardsman named out Sun Yi's behalf. He was undertaken to a house and shipped to a chamber on the 4-story. He implemented Same D been specified to the 8 crew, the really recent item he had requested to occur. While he introduced the chamber, Sun Yi saw which looked like a gravestone in front line of him. He selected it up and implemented it was done of white's polystyrene. It would quickly be coated in dark colorant, and it would be Sun Yi's job to do it sealed by frictional it in a wet lip before the white's bottom began to shaw via. Sun Yi had no concept which Halloween was, although it came as a large ease how no factual corpse bodies were implicated. It was enigmatic to him how nobody would wish these painful decorations. He was wonder why human beings would buy the type of terrible material, says Canada movie maker Leon Shelter, who would after get to aware Sun Yi. Before one day a guardsman said him West human beings include the type of a civilization, as called fest, and how's why they are manufacturing he. Quickly dark dye coated Sun Yi's person and flesh. He treated of 4 o'clock before 23 o'clock or stroke of midnight, break just to take. At overnight, he after withdrawn, his hands would go as he slept, as if he was polisher tombstones in his ambition. Up his detention, Sun Yi had been an engineering for an oil and gas business. His twist stemmed of a opportunity meet in a team of human beings implement street close his household in Beijing. They were practitioner Falun Gong, a religious motion freely relying on Daoism and Buddhist, and Sun Yi quickly united up. Falun Gong was initially admitted by China's communistic authorities following its occurrence in the previous 1990s, but following a few years they began to see the motion as capacity risk, since of its increasing amount. Criticisms began to seem in the country print, motive several 10,000 practitioners to get portion in a quiet outcry external the governing communistic side's Beijing staff in 1999. The motion was prohibited quickly following how the China by the government later start up a ruthless transparency campaigning versus Falun Gong, brand it and wrong worship. Its followers quickly had to practice in open secret, venturing proceedings and detention. In February 2008, for a crackdown in the work-up to the Beijing Spartakiada, Sun Yi was trapped. Detained for a attack at an subterranean clique, he was condemned to couple and a half year in jail. How is while he was undertaken to Masanjia, a de-education via labor camping in the polar east of the nation how posted criminals as so as dissidents and policy prisoners. Time he was down there, his woman wrote to him expressive him she requested a divorce rate. She and some loved ones had been troubled and arrested next his detention, and she knew how members of her household would failure backdrop checks, and thus be incapable to get jobs, as length as she was marital to him. Sun Yi detained onto the email. It was the just item in Masanjia how was its. About the period, an concept occurred to him. He knew the cemetery kits he was manufacturing were for exportable since the tag were in British. Why not compose letters and conceal them within the boxes? Perhaps who would discover one and speak the planet which was event in Masanjia. One overnight, as he lay in his cage enclosed by 30 or 40 asleep comrade inmates, Sun Yi rotated on his party so how he floored the side. All he could listen were the crickets twittering external. Calmly, he outdore a leaf of document and stretched out a feather. He knew how guard were on patrolling. He selected up his pen and began to compose. Sun Yi after alleged he had spelled on 20 letters in full for his period at Masanjia. He had to be cautious on sliding them in the gravestone kits since he never knew that ones would be inspected. He normally did it for crushed, while some prisoners were external. But one day, as he put a email in a carton, else prisoner saw which he was making. Sun Yi had to get a hazard and speak him which he was up to. Nice, told the some inmate. Do you include any more than how I could assist you conceal? Sun Yi began dividing his letters in some Falun Gong devotees within the camping, and one overnight one of the notes was found by guard for a searching. The guard exhausted the inmate on whom the email was found. They knew he must include an Confederate, since he didn't say British. But he didn't show Sun Yi's participation. Though Sun Yi escaped future penalty on how event, he didn't supervise to avoid the following crackdown versus Falun Gong prisoners. Love lot other, he was constrained to stay in his wrists handcuffed to a bed in and forced to do him renounce. If he bring down sleeping, his legs would offer way and the manacle would cut in him love cold steel. Sun Yi was liberated of Masanjia in September 2010. He transferred on practitioner Falun Gong and print underground press publication, but he stored a low section. And later in 2012, Time Preview West News story sites on the web, Same D found a way to circumvent China's censor of the web. He came through a history on a email how had been found amongst a box of Halloween decorations in Oregon. His email. 4 persons months following the history on Julie's Halloween decorations went virus. A China ammunition depot named Objective Lens published an subject on facility within Masanjia. The on the internet release of the history was after remote, but the China authorities seem to include been shocked by the transparency. Soon subsequently by the government announced how it was end the formation via labor framework and release several 160,000 prisoners. It was not length following the how Julie heard Sun Yi, implicitly at first. This New York Times contacted me and said me how they had been in pin in him and how they were making a history, she says. Same D spelled else email, the period, it was fair for her. In it, he wrote how he was really joyful, how I advertised the email, how's precisely which he requested, Julie remembers. I was so excited, to aware how he was live, for and how he was pride of me and fair knowledge how I did the order item. Sun Yi had not just been contacted by the New York Times, but as well by Leon Shelter, a Canada CEO in a recording of cover Humane Rights Atrocity in China. Sun Yi coordinated to be the object of a movie and began send Li length of oneself. He understood there was an huge hazard. He and his former wife were planner to marry and keep China along, but later a crisp crackdown on Falun Gong practitioners began. Police force raided Sun Yi's former wife's household and said her to pin them if she saw Sun Yi. Up length, Sun Yi was detained. Time he was in guardianship, although his public health began to worsen, so he was liberated on public health perspectives, and he took the prospect to run to Jakarta, the equity of Indonesia, in assist of Leon Shelter. Lifetime was hard down there. Sun Yi attached for asylum seeker statute, but as an refuge seeker he was incapable to job. He couldn't pin his woman for terror of receive her in anxiety in the China authorities. Residing off his saving, he consumable his days training Indonesia and British. It was at the spot how Julie flew out to encounter Sun Yi. Shelter, who'd put them in concern, would be down there to movie the face. Julie had concerned on him always for the 4 persons year how had gone with she'd found his email. She had heard several of Sun Yi's history of Shelter, and was uneasy by the mind how she had introduced to his difficult situation. While she arriving at his humble flat in Jakarta, she didn't aware which to wait. It was love we had the instantaneous connect, says Julie. He named me his sibling. It was love we'd named every some ever. They exchanged talent. He purchased her flowers, time she purchased him a volume on lifetime in Oregon. She as well driven him the mention he had spelled in Mazengia, and the polystyrene gravestone. He seemed very grateful to give all the behind complete round, Julie says. He requested her on the fest of Halloween, which happened to the pumpkins following they were cut. Sun Yi wondered. Did you eat them? Julie explainable the wasn't the tradition. He as well requested to aware which break stood to. Otherwise in world, Julie said him. She explainable how it was a communication of goodwill for the corpse. Following she delivered household, Sun Yi wept while he withdrawn Julie's trip. He had never imaginary she would journey all how way to see him. I very cherish how she did how, he tells Leon Shelter, in an interviewing on Chamber. I don't he aware how to appreciate her. She feels love household. But if lifetime in Jakarta was difficult, it quickly got worse. Soon following Julie's trip, Sun Yi was contacted by a suspected China broker, and 2 months after he died of severe renal fail. In spite a query of his former wife and sisters, down there was no inquiry in the reason of die. Leon is suspect, he had no renal problems, and while I was down there in Indonesia he seemed excellently wholesome. Julie was desolate while she heard the news story. I so ill requested a lucky end for him, she says. She feels honored to include named Sun Yi. He was the largest elastic, powerful man I include always met, for who to go via which he did and go out and be capable to say on it and stake his experiences in the planet, he's fair unbelievable. Her opportunity connect in Sun Yi modified her lifetime, she says. She became more than globally aware, deliberate of wherever the means in the buck store clothes her household had go of, and she solved to undergo on the insight to her family. Kadi Paler was neglected in a marketplace in China while she was 3 days ancient. Her parents leftward a mention proverb they would encounter her on a renowned axle 10 or 20 year after.